This week on the Retirement Quick Tips podcast, I'm talking about the key provisions of the One Big Beautiful Bill that was recently signed into law and how that might impact you. So today I want to talk about the biggest impact of this bill that no one is really talking about, at least in terms of what I read, what I see on YouTube. I don't really watch the news, so it's mainly what I read online and I see. And that is the bill's impact on markets, your 401k, your investment portfolio. I've seen quite a bit on how it's going to increase the deficit, but outside of that, I don't really see a lot of talk about that. Other than all of the tax considerations that impact a wide variety of Americans, the biggest impact of this bill by far, in my opinion, is going to be the ripple effect it has on the economy and the markets. And I recently read a letter to investors from Mark Keller. He's the CEO and Chief Investment Officer at Confluence Investment Management. I actually know Mark personally. He's been in the investment world, I think longer than I've been alive, going on 40 plus years now. And here's what he said recently in his letter. He says, quote, "The headlines are pointing out the resulting increase in the federal budget deficit going forward and the associated rise in interest costs. All true," parentheses, that's his opinion. But what they're not talking about is how stimulative the bill is. Whenever the federal government runs big deficits, it is pumping a lot more cash into the economy than it's collecting in taxes. This gives the economy a boost, even though the long run effects may lead to elevated inflation and higher interest rates. Okay, I agree with pretty much everything here. One of my big problems with what the Fed was doing after COVID in 2020, 2021, by keeping interest rates too low for too long, is that was very stimulative to the economy. Money was easy. People had lots of cash after all the check printing and money printing and just giving money. If you remember the PPP loans that businesses got to stay open, I mean, there was just money dropping out of helicopters. And then the Biden administration didn't do any service to anybody because the Inflation Reduction Act, which was a joke because it did the opposite, was also very stimulative and made the inflation problem worse. And that's why we're here. If you fast forward several years, interest rates are still very high. You look at mortgages, car loans, everything. It's impossible. And inflation is still sticky. Now, it's not as high as it once was, but it's still sticky. So the problem with this bill, if this is correct, is the stimulus. Now, in the short term, will it help the economy? Certainly. I've read different estimates that say it's going to add anywhere from, 0.5% to maybe a little bit more than that to GDP growth, which is meaningful. So in the short term, will it boost the economy? Most likely. Could that be what keeps offsets the tariff impact to keep the economy moving forward and not go into recession? Perhaps. But especially when you look at the combination of how stimulative this bill is with the tariffs on top of that, the long run effects, from what Mark Keller was saying here, he says the long run effects may lead to elevated inflation and higher interest rates. And I think that's going to be the problem with this bill. Now, this is not a political comment about whether or not Trump is right or wrong, or what he did is right or wrong. I'm just trying to look at the facts of the situation and see that, yes, they're cutting taxes more than they're offsetting that with revenue increases. That's just a math problem. Here's what I think. If you believe that elevated inflation and higher interest rates are on the horizon, then it would cause you to make some different decisions. So one of the issues with elevated interest rates, higher interest rates, is problematic because I think a lot of people out there are really counting on interest rates to go down. My husband and I we talk every week about possibly moving, but why would we when we're locked into a 3% mortgage? So if we were to buy another house, lock ourselves into a 7% mortgage, that's a huge leap and a huge risk, depending on, what we're buying and all of that, with the hope that, oh gosh, if we move, we better hope that interest rates go down to 6%, 5% so we can refinance. So that's a very dangerous situation to be in. And I think quite a few Americans who have moved in the last couple of years are in that situation right now. They were told interest rates are going to go down. What is it? You date the rate and marry the house, something like that. Like to imply that the rate that you pay on your mortgage is temporary. Well, that may be true, but can you handle it if you're paying a 7% mortgage rate for 5 years, 6 years, 7 years? It's not outside of the realm of possibility. So one of the main takeaways here, if interest rates do remain elevated, I'm not saying they're going to go a lot higher from here. I'm just saying there's not a lot of wiggle room when you have tariffs and government stimulus in the economy. It will help with economic growth, but it's going to be problematic for the Fed to start lowering interest rates, especially without spiking inflation. So in this environment, I would not expect or count on that interest rates are going to go down from the levels that they are right now in a meaningful way. I think they will go down some. And so for bond investors, it's a good time to get out of cash and money markets and lock in rates. You can get a 2-3 year CD still at around 4%, which I think is pretty good. So for certain bond investors, depending on your situation, there are opportunities that I think are around today because of the higher interest rates. But on the flip side, I would also be very cautious about taking on any new debt, like locking yourself into a 7% mortgage. If you do that, make sure you can afford it. I also think there's opportunities in floating rate bonds where you earn a higher interest rate. If interest rates stay elevated, it allows you to be a little bit more flexible. Short to intermediate term bonds are also attractive if interest rates remain elevated, so you can reinvest as rates are changing. And if rates go higher, there's a lot less risk in shorter term bonds versus longer term bonds. Then we have elevated inflation. In that environment, if inflation remains elevated, or even if it goes a little bit higher, which I think is not just a possibility, but like a pretty decent probability that will happen, I would really focus on owning top tier quality stocks. Stocks are great to own in an inflation environment because companies have pricing power. They can increase their prices. Inflation protection bonds are also another area where you can, again, protect yourself, as the name implies, in a higher interest rate, higher inflationary environment. Possibly gold and other commodities, although I've talked about this before, I'm not a huge fan of gold. I think there are better ways to protect against inflation. And then real estate. All you need to do is look at the value of real estate in just the last few years to see what an inflationary environment does to real estate prices. And there's some weird stuff going on in real estate right now. I think there might actually, especially where you're seeing price declines in certain markets, depending on where you live, it could be an interesting buying opportunity over the next year, couple of years, as this sort of works its way through the economy. I don't think it's going to be an immediate impact. I think the stimulus will be, but I think the elevated inflation, longer term interest rates are something that's kind of going to stick with us for a while longer than most people expect. So that's problematic. But if you know how to take advantage of it, it can help you to sidestep the real serious problems that come with higher inflation and elevated interest rates. I would avoid holding lots and lots of cash, which is, you might as well just light that on fire after all the inflation eats away at that. I would avoid longer term bonds. I would avoid speculative stocks. I would focus on quality. All right, that's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. My name is Ashley Michike, and this is the Retirement Quick Tips Podcast.